Kaya sounds na si magniso de hewe ono tuihi tuwai ni do na si yon honug ani tu kigimati.
The ancient pine nut rituals began in the spring, many months before the fall harvest.
Pine nut harvest begins with the spring blessing, what we call a spring blessing. It's when our people go out into the hills. Somebody go up there and scout and find where the cones are going to be. If there's nice cones up there, they'll be there. Then they'll move to that area, and they'll take everybody up there. And they'll find the cones, and they have to get 2 cones, the right size, everything, a branch, and it's broken off, and an offering is left at that tree. Something is tied to it. Something is left there. It's given a drink of water. And this branch or twig is taken to running water. It always has to be running water, a spring that runs year-round. And this branch or twig is wrapped with one of our most important medicines, the sagebrush. And so the sagebrush is also important to our people as a medicine. And so it's wrapped in that, and it's tied and it's placed in the water. And the oldest person blesses the branch. This branch is going to represent everything, all the forests. The cones are going to represent all the pine cones that are coming out. They're going to pray for the water. They're going to pray for that, the storms to come, to wet the trees, to keep them wet, keep the pine nuts growing. These prayers go on. Then when they're ready, then we dance. It's placed in the water. Then we start our dance. So the old songs are sung up there in the mountains. The kids, they sit there and learn. They watch the old people, the babies, the younger children. They have to learn this because someday we're going to be gone.
Native Americans utilize their ancestral knowledge of the land to tell them when the time is right to harvest.
You have to listen to the wind. You have to listen to the water. You have to look at the horizons and watch the sunset and the sunrise and hear everything out there. The animals, watch the animals. Everything that happens out here is telling you something. And it oftentimes falls upon deaf ears if people aren't in tune to it. And Indian people are. You look all around, you see all the plants, they have those yellow flowers on it. That's rabbit brush. And the flowers get real yellow, real bright. And that's one of the indicators, and we know it's time to go pick pine nuts. And the pine nut birds that we have that tell us there's a lot of different indicators that we listen to, and that's what helps us find the place.
We usually have a man that goes out and scouts for the pine nuts. He looks at them, he tells the people if they're ready, then he brings them back and shows them. Then they get ready to do the fall blessing, the fall dance. And we can't go out and pick the pine nuts until we do this. What our people typically look for when they go out scouting for the pine nuts is the green cones. If they're nice and large, fat, if they got pitch dripping off them, those are the ones that we're going to go to, the trees. There's lots on there. That's what they look for.
When the event happens in early fall, harvesters gather the unopened green cones, which require the heat from a large roasting pit to release the nuts.
The green cone is a lot of fun if you want to come out and camp, for a few days and just cook them in the coals like that. And then, when they're cooked, you just take them out of the cones and eat them.
The process for the late fall harvest, after the cones are opened, is simpler, but the pickers may have to collect more cones to obtain the same amount of pine nuts.
Usually they're big and black, and you go by the size and the oiliness of the pine nuts when you cook it, how oily it is. Those are the ones you want to get, is the oily pine nuts.
Pinyon trees produce cones every 2 or 3 years, so it's necessary to rotate through different harvest areas and to help each other when the crops are marginal.
They might be in one area 1 year, then they won't produce pine nuts for another 3 years or 4 years. So we'd have to move 50 miles, 100 miles, 200 miles away to go gather the pine nuts. And the pine nuts really were a staple of our people. That was the bulk of their diet.
It seems to me, where the people are picking the pine nuts, those areas that are used frequently seem to have the best pine nuts. So because, the area's already cleaned, the areas, the trees are taken care of a little bit better. So they seem to produce more nuts.
You see people out here with the long sticks and they're hitting the trees, and it's referred to as like whipping the trees. And you have to do that in order to make the old things fall down, and then it makes room for the new ones to flourish. And trees and crops will do that.
What I'm doing is actually just knocking the pine nuts out of the cones, and sometimes you'd have a hook. And so some of these lower branches that are dead, the old people would say you gotta trim those.
In addition to poles, typically made of birch wood, Native Americans use a wide variety of handmade tools to assist in the harvest. One item is called a burden basket, which is used to carry large amounts of pine cones back to the camp. These handmade baskets are made of willow and are loosely woven to let tree debris and pine needles fall through. Back at the camp, the nuts are cleaned by women using winnowing trays, which are also made of willow.
When they clean them and they put the pine nuts in the basket, and then because sometimes see, they just pick up everything, you know, have this kind of stuff, and they'd throw it up in the air. And if you have a little wind like this, it'll blow all that stuff out, you know, and you just have the nuts.
Notice the basket is a coarser weave, so when you shake it, it'll fall through, but I'm trying to just pick up most of the stuff.
Winnowing uses a tossing motion that cleans the pine pitch and needles from the nuts. Once the debris is removed, the nuts are slightly roasted to harden the shells.
Put the pine nuts in the basket, you know, and then put the coals on top, and just keep shaking it and moving it, and as soon as you hear, they'll kind of pop, you know, when they're getting done. That's when you know they're ready. But the skill was not to, you know, burn the basket. It was just amazing to see them work, you know, and cook the pine nuts like that.
A grinding stone is then carefully used to crack the shells, and the nuts are winnowed a second time.
The method of this is very tedious, you know, but it's, you know, it takes lots of patience. So the Indian women, you know, that time that was their job to prepare the food for the family.
After you break the shells and you put it back in the basket, then you have to clean the shells out of the basket and off the pine nuts. And then, after all the shells are off, then you get some more charcoal and dry the pine nuts, and that gives it that charcoal taste.
Once the pine nuts are cleaned, shelled, and roasted, they provide several different sources of food. To make pine nut flour, which is used in many Native American meals, the grinding stone is utilized again to mash the pine nuts.
We use it for a lot of making your pine nut patties or whatever you're going to use it for, you know. There's so much way to use these.
What makes the pine nut such a desirable food source for the harsh winter months is their high amount of protein and resistance to cold.
Pine nuts never freeze. You could, that's the one food that you didn't worry about freezing, no matter how cold it got.
But during the long winter, how would Native American families survive if their harvest area didn't produce an ample supply of pine nuts?
We were told never to be greedy and stingy with the pine nuts. You always, like I say, we always had to share. And we do that to this day.
Our traditional greeting, we don't have a word for hello or goodbye. Our traditional greeting is ha'udekana, ha'umudekana, have you eaten? So when somebody comes, you ask them that.
Those things were part of the tradition, you know, to invite other people in if they didn't have any pine nuts in their area, you know, and sometimes that happens.
When we go and we pick pine nuts, it doesn't matter where you go, it's always somebody else's area. And so out of respect, you always have to ask permission. And that's something that is still carried on to this day. From a long time ago it was that way. Whenever you go in, and just to show your respect for that, you ask people whether or not it was okay to come in and gather pine nuts in their area, because it was really not that they owned it, but it was theirs to kind of watch over. And so we wanted to make sure that we were not doing anything that was offensive to anybody.